karma. And of course, we hope to have a lively discussion about this. I'm going to make a few comments as usual to start with, and then we'll open up for dialogue. Last week we did intimate relationships, which was sort of, I guess in a sense, a small piece of what we're talking about here, which is how our relationships reflect our Dharma practice. And in this case, we're talking about having a look at ourselves not just as a sort of isolated individual working, struggling through, or having whatever insights and realizations we're having, whatever challenges we're facing, but as part of a bigger fabric, a larger fabric, which is how we interdepend, how we interact with others. So next week we're going to look at a bigger, even pull the lens back more and look at the whole fabric of culture and society. And the idea here is to gain perspective on our situation, which can sometimes seem kind of focused in a tight way on our own issues. But we start to see that our karma unfolds as part of a matrix or a network of other beings. And they're reflecting us, we're reflecting them all the time. So in this case, the whole idea of why bother with this is to gain perspective about our situation. And in particular, as we're practicing meditation, people come up against all kinds of opportunities and obstacles to keep going with it. And to have a look at how maybe our family karma has helped shape some of our strengths, and you could say our sort of obstacles or kleshas. I used to say that one of my uncles was the Fort Knox of our family neurosis, the sort of the golden standard. And I think a lot of families, when we look at kind of our own tendencies or habits to shut things down in a particular way, to get stuck in a particular way, that studying our family karma can be very, very helpful in terms of understanding and therefore allowing us to liberate ourselves from some of those patterns. And at the same time, there's the notion of the strength or power, you could say, which has been embodied at different times in terms of things like family crests and kind of pride of lineage, of being part of a particular family. And so we're going to try to look at both aspects of that, which is, you could say, strengths and weaknesses that we've inherited, in a sense, and how that comes into being and how we can work with that. So, of course, we're looking at the nuclear family, so to speak, which is very important in the West. It seems like a lot of that sort of extended family energy has diminished quite a bit in quite a few families in Western culture. So we have much stronger ties with, let's say, our parents and our siblings than we might with our cousins, our aunts and uncles. Some cultures, those ties are stronger. In some areas of our culture, they're stronger. But to have a look first at that close relationship, and probably obviously the closest karmic relationship we have in this life is with our parents, which is unrelated to whether we've chosen to sort of connect with that and explore that, or would rather not talk about it. So the full range of being, very proud to be from a certain set of parents to feeling like maybe they're the ones who are responsible for you being in whatever state you're in. So there's a pretty wide range there, and that also is different. When we talk about culture next week, just to mention a little bit, that's a little bit different also from maybe. I'm remembering that I went and saw Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche give a weekend workshop, and he was talking about, as do many Buddhist teachers from Asia, talk about the mother as being the kind of root and source of compassion, because when we were, young and helpless, this person did everything for us, you know, and including carrying us in her womb for 9 months, which is, as the women out there know, has some pleasurable dimensions, I'm sure, but is a tremendous gift. Um, and you could say fundamental example of generosity and compassion to do that for another being. And then when we're born, we come out, we're not really all that independent when we're born, and so our parents are the people who've sort of taken care of us when we're totally helpless and could not even vaguely consider taking care of ourselves. So in in the traditional cultures, you could say, or the ones from which Buddhism comes, the role of the mother is seen as almost, you could say, the paradigm or paragon or ultimate model for compassion, for developing love and compassion. So I think when when sometimes when you are presented with that model in workshops that are given in the West, and people say, okay, just think of your mother, and that'll sort of open the gateway for compassion to you or your parents. And some people, of course, in our culture have spent a lot of time figuring out exactly how their parents screwed them up, and particularly maybe their relationship with their mother as being sort of a key hotbed for developing one's own particular style of neurosis and confusion. So it's not uncommon for those two cultures to kind of bump up against each other in this particular topic of conversation. But if we look at it more simply, just the notion of being cared for at that sort of totally organic level, and there's a series of contemplations you can do to go through that. It even includes, in the more modern version of it, if you're a test tube baby, that somebody actually kept the test tube warm and took care of your being at that level in a petri dish. Somebody was keeping that under surveillance and making sure that you were okay in your little petri dish. So there is some principle there of our lives. We come in completely helpless. There's even a great lama who's born and reincarnated and whatever. If you're the Dalai Lama or a Karmapa or somebody, your mother still is the one who's taking care of you when you're completely helpless at that early stage of life. So that's one dimension of the parents, and the other is that in our family, in our nuclear family culture, from the minute you're born, those two people, depending on who's around and how much they're around and what their interaction is, are imprinting on you from the minute you open your mouth to make your first cry, like literally. And then they say even before that, your consciousness exists, is developing organically when you're in the womb, and all kinds of impressions are being registered. Even Western psychiatry talks about that, and therapy, that the even when we're in the state of our embryonic existence, we're receiving impressions from our parents, and particularly, obviously, the mother in that case. So these two people are imprinting on us from day one and before, a kind of energy, a kind of mood, an atmosphere, stress levels, happiness, joy, ease, anxiety, whatever they have, is the baby is being imprinted so heavily from the moment of birth and before. And of course, then as we grow older and we're sort of looking around and seeing what are we supposed to do here and how to behave, the parents are unbelievably powerful, actually, in influencing us towards developing the way how we behave and how we feel about life. So I guess that's idiot simple in a way, not really worth arguing about that point. So probably the next level of influence is from the siblings in a family that's somewhat close together. like if you have a big sister like I do, and you know what kind of attitude she has towards you entering the crowd. Um, and all of us have had the experience of, you know, maybe having a big brother, if we're a boy, uh, who tortured us. I don't happen to have that, but I've seen it, and some of my best friends have that, or are that, where if you're the oldest brother, and you either are supporting, but there's all kinds of ways in which the brothers and the sisters are imprinting on us and making us either feel welcome or competitive or unuseful, or fantastic, you know. So all these models are happening totally apart from if there was no previous karma at all. You could say these things are generating tremendous karmic imprint as we go from day one, and obviously tremendous influence on our early development. So much so that this is probably an area where both Buddhist practice and therapy come together in saying that these imprints are tremendously important in terms of us understanding our own patterns and our own karma and working with those, and both from the point of view, again, of strength, resources, and also from the point of view of feeling trapped in certain kind of habitual patterns that are kind of overwhelming. So I just want to say again, we are live right now. If you're watching the archives sometime in the future, from the point of view of now, it'll be now to you, but it'll be the past for us. So you won't be able to write in your questions and comments at that point. However, now you can. So by going to a second window in your browser and going to facebook.com/DavidNickturn, you can participate in this. And I see more and more people starting to join us online. So thanks for letting me know you're out there. There's Metamorphos. I hope I'm saying your name right. Neely Ray. Hi, Neely. How are you? Hope you're doing well. Mai from Canada, and David Dimitri from Montreal, and Kristen from upstate New York, Monica from DC. So Beth, hi Beth, Kathleen Sullivan. So a lot of Shayna, a lot of the Deb Star Divine, a lot of the usual suspects are here. If you're not a usual suspect and are joining us for the first time, it'd be great to know that you're there. So again, you know, by going to that second window in your browser, facebook.com/DavidNickturn, and just let us know you're out there. And then there'll be plenty of time tonight to log on and get your 2 cents into the picture here. So, of course, that's one very obvious point of view of how karma works, is that we're being imprinted heavily by our nuclear family, our parents and our siblings, from the minute, and as we said before, we enter this particular body and this particular world. From a Buddhist point of view, it's quite, actually, there's a subtle difference. The Buddhist point of view is that the consciousness that we have and that we bring into this world has a history to it, an antecedent to it. It's a little bit subtle. It's not like, it's a subtle consciousness, but a lot of seeds or imprints are already embedded into that consciousness from previous lifetimes. So this is an idea that you can chew on for yourself, and you can either decide that you don't want to look at things that way, which really doesn't sort of change some of the fundamental realities we're going to talk about. But it is interesting to think that if you flip this, this does take you to a different outlook, perhaps than the traditional Western psychotherapy model. So let's just entertain this notion for a moment that in the Buddhist teachings, there is a notion that our consciousness continues from lifetime to lifetime, or the subtle aspects of it, not as a solid fixed entity. And that's a conversation that came out of last week's conversation, not as a Atman or a soul per se. So that's a matter of definition, but as some kind of river of consciousness that's flowing along, and that is sort of, if there's a certain amount of patterning, like the water is turbulent, it's going to pass the turbulent water on down the line. And so that patterns are what's sort of moving forward. It's a little bit more closely akin to, you could say, Western scientific point of view of how energy is transmitted and moves through space and time. So looking at ourselves as energetic beings that have a physical dimension, which is kind of a spiritual take on life, that from that point of view, there's a lot of tendencies or habits or propensities, probably would be a better word for it, that actually come into bearing and actually affect where we're born, to whom we're born, and what kind of body we're born into, and what kind of situation we're born into. So that's kind of a wild way of looking at things that probably might be a stretch for some of us. Other people might go, yeah, of course, obviously, and everything in between. But entertaining that notion for a minute, because it is a traditional Buddhist notion, we gravitate towards the parents as being almost holding the karmic environment in which we are most sort of, you could say, at home. And that would include both the strengths and what we'd call the weaknesses, or sort of klesha dimension of it, and all the subtleties of it. So it's not unusual, for example, for somebody who's a dharmic person to be born into a family or a place in which that kind of training can continue. The obvious example of that, to the extreme, is in the Tibetan culture, where the lamas, some of the lamas are reborn over and over again, like the Dalai Lama or the Karmapa, into situations in which they can be recognized fairly early on and continue to train as Buddhist teachers. So from that point of view, you could look at it as sort of a energy of attraction, energy of repulsion or aversion. Those are our two strongest navigating forces. If you think about just going through life itself, we're drawn towards certain situations. We're magnetized. If we've fallen in love with somebody, we're drawn towards them. If we don't like somebody or something we want to get away from them, that's aversion. Those two forces are how we actually, in the first place, get involved with the kind of relationship in which we could have children. So we're sort of recreating that circumstance over and over again by being attracted to something that feels familiar and kind of workable for us, and maybe even appealing for us. And of course, since we're sort of in a ordinary, confused state, you could say, not to hurt anybody's feelings, and but just to kind of take a look at the current situation. Maybe we're not wildly confused and deranged, but there's a certain amount of uncertainty or lack of clarity about who we are and what we're doing. And otherwise, probably we're not studying Buddhism if that's not there. So that's called the first noble truth. Right? We recognize that something's awry. And looking at that, we go, well, the parents, that point of view, are creating a situation in the whole place we're born and all that. It's creating a situation in which we can continue to work on our core issues, almost, you could say. And so there's a highlighting, like if you took a highlighter pen with the parents, it would be sort of, you're magnetized by the strength and kind of feeling of communion with certain energies there. And you're also feeling like these are some of the most strong patterns that we're working with, and we're sort of drawn into a situation in which they're going to be kind of very strongly present. So that's a very unusual way of looking at things, and it takes away, what it does do is, if you do it, it takes away 100% of blame, and just going, well, I was an innocent little bystander, and I was born into this horrible situation. So, of course, it's very contentious for a lot of people who think that a baby is born as a total innocent being, tabula rasa, blank slate. But from a Buddhist point of view, we don't think that somebody's born tabula rasa. They have the karma coming in, and that karma is going to be highly reflected in their relationship with their parents. So that's, we should have considerable conversation about that. The point is, whether you think that's how you got there or not, irrelevant to the fact that once you are born into that situation, there is a heavy imprint going on. And probably none of us would argue about that point, that we're being influenced on a totally organic level by the energy of the parents and the siblings. Ergo, so it makes sense from any point of view to take a good look at your parents, take a good look at your siblings, and see what of yourself you can see in them. And there's tremendous information. We're not talking about like living with your parents for the rest of your life, but we're also not talking about running away from who they might represent to you. Even if you're not connecting with them, you connect with the threads of the imprints that you've inherited from them, both through genetics, which we haven't even talked about yet, and also through kind of accumulated experience. So what we're recommending is taking a good look in your sort of contemplative meditation, and as you begin to learn about yourself through the practice of meditation, to really not shy away from looking at the energy of the parents, and not make the foolish mistake of sort of isolating ourselves from them and thinking that we've sort of achieved escape velocity completely from that karmic situation into which we were born. So in a way, it's kind of using that information, because in our meditative practice, what we're really trying to discover is a sort of clearer relationship with ourselves, right? And understanding ourselves better, and also becoming better able to understand others and have a sort of more developed interaction. So a lot of this is somewhat obvious, but so be it, because I pity the fool who overlooks the obvious. And I also pity the other fool who is so locked in and feels so lost and destined to repeat. So there's this whole other map here, or grid, of understanding how we get stuck by looking at our relationships with our parents, but also understanding this is actually a vehicle for achieving greater freedom and liberating oneself from these patterns. So this is not all about just realizing, hey, you're stuck there, just grin and bear it, or intoxication with the positive qualities of it, but really setting out to achieve a certain level of freedom from just repeating patterns over and over again. So that's the basic idea with the parents. Then, of course, there's the whole extended family, which is interesting. I don't know about you all, but I've had fluctuating relationships with I've had good relationships with uncles and aunts, and they've had, actually, some of my uncles and aunts have played key roles in my life, and that's really beautiful in a way, because at times when we're growing up, the relationship with the parents can be kind of intense, particularly like late teen years or something like that. And the uncles and aunts, like in my case, my mother's brother, Uncle Irv, who was a great musician and fabulous guy and kind of fun guy, kind of completely influenced my life, and I got a chance to model some of my behavior, not directly on my parents, but on my mother's brother's side. And then, grandparents, like, I don't know about you, but my grandparents came from a different country, and a whole different culture. So my grandparents were immigrants, as some of yours might be too. So there's a feeling of tapping into a whole depth of culture and a richness of ancestry that can be quite complex. So, for example, your ancestry might be informing certain attitudes, and like in my case, being Jewish and coming from a Jewish culture had a certain influence, and particularly Old World Russian and Polish Jewish. And there's a historical depth to that, and of course then, we've been influenced by all of those things. So we're not trying to, by meditating, sort of clear ourselves from where we come from, and achieve this kind of neutrality, but more it's sort of recognizing that there's a tremendous fountain of interdependent experience there that we can draw on, and obviously it's better to draw on the strengths and sort of recognize the weaknesses. That would be kind of the intelligent person's or the prajna point of view. So, and then lately, my, cousins, sometimes you have more or less contact with them. They look strangely like you, like I'm going to go to Maui with Krishnadas and Ramdas workshop, Jack Kornfeld, in December, and one of my cousins, second cousin, lives on Maui, and I've kind of haven't seen her at all since much younger, and she's a yoga teacher there, and we're going to have a visit when I'm there, and then I look at the picture and I go, wow, that person looks kind of like we do, So there's genes floating around out there with our names on them or our little numbers on them, and people walking around, maybe with inclinations towards similar illnesses, towards similar values. So the main thread here is that it's all tremendously interconnected. It's like a weave of sorts, and our individuality is kind of suspended in that weave. And if we try to isolate ourselves from that weave, probably we lose the capacity to get great insight into our own issues, and also a lot of strength that comes from that. So what the strong dimensions of that are, which maybe aren't emphasized sometimes enough in certain models of analyzing these things, like the strong suits that we got, So I'm going to look forward to hearing from you about all these things in pretty short order. There's a funny memory I had when I was thinking about this. Seth, if you're still there, Seth had to go to a meeting tonight because Sakyong Mipan Rinpoche is coming to New York in a week or so. For those of you who are around on November 8th and 9th, he's presenting in New York, and Seth is helping to set that up, so he may not be there anymore. But I officiated at Seth and Emily's recent wedding, back in June, I think it was. And that's a time, and like Thanksgiving, weddings, funerals, when all those people that look kind of like you come together. And it's, since I started officiating at some of my young friends' weddings, which is really, really fun for me, to see the families come together. And you go, oh, this is a tribe here. I've known this person as an individual, but this is a whole tribe of people here with a lot of commonalities. And at one point, Seth's aunt, I think, or maybe great aunt, couldn't come because she was too weak, and we set up an iPad on one of the chairs, and she was sitting there officiating the wedding, and there's Seth's aunt in an iPad sitting on a chair where you could see her face, and she was able to see us and even talk if she wanted to. So I think we're approaching the age of sort of virtual family being a whole other dimension of it. But there is this net, this weave of which we're part, and sometimes I like to say individuality is a kind of overly appreciated aspect of existence. We've emphasized it so strongly in our culture. You've got to be an individual, and but really, if you look, we're really part of a weave. That's what we're trying to get into, a weave of intimate relationships, of family relationships, and cultural and society relationships that in some sense define us every bit as much as what we take to be our individual kind of thingy, And I think certain cultures have emphasized that much more than ours does, that kind of weave and the interdependence quality of it. So that's another thing to have a look at there. The most of us, as modern Westerners, have taken a good look at our family karma, at least in this lifetime, to try to liberate some kind of view of how we got where we are. And I would say the difference maybe is, of course, these two approaches can come together very well, particularly lately. They've overlapped much more than they had in the past, and you have more Buddhists who are interested in therapy, and more therapists or analysts who are interested in the Buddhist training, because it has so much to say about the qualities of mind and how your mind works. The Buddhist tradition does. So, but we're not really particularly emphasizing going back in a time capsule and just analyzing and sort of dredging from the point of view of just looking at things. And probably good therapy doesn't do that either. There's a feeling of what is present with us now as we meditate and we sit and work with the sense of the thoughts that arise in the moment, and looking carefully at the origin and root of those. And particularly when it comes to, as I've been working with people a lot lately, not just the mental process, but the physical body and the emotional body. Really looking at our present configuration, which is what meditation is really doing, is allowing us to have a very open, clear look at our present configuration of our body and speech and mind. And then, of course, in that are embedded shards from the past that are essentially sort of, constricting us, So I'm doing some practices with people that are contemplative practices, and if anybody's interested in it, you can contact me directly. But how to really feel through our current energy and our current body and our current emotional world, see what comes up for us in terms of what's been trapped, what memories have been trapped, and how much they're governing how we're experiencing the present moment. So I guess you could say the Buddhist approach is to go from the present. If the present is liberated already, we don't dwell on the past. But it's also not accurate to say that the Buddhist practices in their deeper sense are just saying, well, just be here now and that's all you have to do. Because all of us have something that we've brought to the present that's embedded in various ways and obstructing our kind of full extension and our full expression of who we are. So even in particular practices, we go back and we try to have a careful look at our obstructions and obstacles, and with the intention of purifying and liberating those. So it's not just a question of snapping out the thoughts out of the mind and like jerking a towel and now everybody's enlightened, There is a processing that goes on, and a digging deeper into how we got here. So the family as the engine of karma is a very big deal. Not something that we can really sort of just put on a different costume or an outfit, robes, whatever you have, and just say, okay, now I'm from here, Anybody who's doing deep dharma work is going to have to take a good look at where they came from, and it's inevitable. So I think that's the main point, is seeing these things not as sort of peripheral or a burden, particularly, or just being Pollyanna-ish about it. Oh, everything was great, But really having a careful look at who we are and the influence of the family on that, with the intent of developing clarity and a kind of freedom from any unconscious, constrictive kind of patterns that may have developed from all that. So I think maybe that's enough to say tonight. It's a juicy topic if we just grab into it. And so what I'd like to do is invite you all to go to, if you're watching live, open a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com/David Nichtern, and now let's take the rest of the time and have some kind of conversation about this. So I have a feeling, my gut, my spidey sense is tingling that some of you probably have already done that, and I'm right. So I invite the rest of you who haven't yet jumped the gun, so to speak, to jump the gun now, and let's talk about family and karma, and let's see what you guys have to say. Okay, let's see. So, wow, Darcy is calling from Tatamagouche. The connection is fairly awful tonight. Must be the pending snow. Oh my goodness, you have pending snow there already? Okay, all right. Well, you can, Darcy, you can watch then when you, after the snow falls. So let's see. Let's take a look at the first one here. Pieta Van Dyke is saying, I've always found it interesting that I was born into my family. Yeah, join the club. I'm the youngest of 7 children. Wow, that's of course unusual. Adored by my older siblings. This resulted in a strong self-esteem, which is interesting because my parents did not have strong self-esteem. They did, however, have a strong Christian faith. I chose not to follow that path, but they did instill a strong moral code, which has made it easier for me to take on the ideas of following the precepts, the Buddhist precepts. Great. Thank you for that contribution. And the way you're carrying that forward. Beth is saying, interesting watching the relationship between me and my mother change since my father passed away in April. We're getting along where we used to clash. Also interesting seeing commonalities between me and my nieces. Okay, so that's just sort of having a look at some of the family influences there and how they shift and change. Okay, we have, again, reminding you now is a good time to write in your questions and comments, so we can have a sort of our version of a virtual conversation here, dialogue, group conversation. Again, if anybody's writing something that's interesting to you and you feel like you want to respond directly to them, you can just click your reply onto their comment. So that's completely acceptable in this context, and I think a lot of people have been doing that. So Beth is saying, I was lucky to know many aunts, uncles, 3 generations, many musicians, athletes, teachers. I sing, play basketball, and teach at my job as a clinician. Core values were strong, which helped me get through a recent illness. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm hoping somebody comes up with the sort of downside of the thing. Let's see what anybody else has to say. Neely is saying, my mother's side of the family, which had a couple of second cousin marriages in my grandfather's generation, just to make what degree of cousin someone is confusing, okay, now holds a big contra dance or a square dance in Vermont every year. Wow, how cool is that? My favorite contra is one where couples form an arch with their arms and the couple behind you ducks under and through. Then they raise their arms and you duck under and through like a literal weaving of people. And in this case, of mostly relatives as well. It's very symbolic for me, and I get to see all of my cousins. Fantastic. Cool. So far, most of you are writing in sort of from the point of view of having a sense of strength and positive energy from the connection with the family karma. Rebecca is saying, my energetic family is the Padma family, which is a different kind of family. Those are the 5 Buddha families, for those of you who haven't studied that yet. And that's sort of how our energy works. My physical family all basically embody that dominant energy. Well, that's very interesting altogether. Imagine a house full of Italian Padmas. Padma is the magnetizing energy that kind of works with the energy of attraction a lot. And artists, musicians, very creative people, and highly intuitive. This was all encouraged in my family. But there are some pretty hot and fiery interactions. Well, maybe you could say more about those, Rebecca. So maybe those of you who are writing in now, it would be interesting to look at some of the issues Or if any of you think this is, not worth your time, like what do I need to spend time contemplating my family if I'm a Buddhist practitioner and I'm just trying to be here now and be present? Who cares where I came from? You know, let's say you had that point of view and you want to share it. Please jump in. So I'm just looking for other comments. If you could, please place them. Sometimes, unfortunately, they do not come through on time for us to work with them, so we're doing the best we can. Sikandar is saying, my parents are very devout Muslims, and my private decision to go another path, telling them would cause them much distress. Okay, that's interesting. Right, there you go. Has been oppressing me for long now. I feel strangely alienated and alone, even while being around them. In the past, they have suspected that I don't follow their faith, and warned me that they would not even have dinner with me again if this was the case. Okay, wow, I think everybody can feel the power of that. Not being able to even share with your parents, people who raised you, kind of what you're into. And I think a lot of people from different points of view have had some version of that story. Very, very poignant there, Sikandar. So it brings up the issue of, in a way, in the Buddhist teachings, there is another type of family, which is not genetic, but is also karmic, which is called Sangha, or the community of practitioners. And, I would say for me that's a parallel family. People I've been studying and practicing with for 40 some odd years now. And there's a familial or clan-like quality to it. So that's another option there in terms of getting that kind of sense of communion and contact with people who do share a like mindset. And really, some of us have some of both, I would say, probably. But certainly, if you go deeply into the Buddhist practice, the Sangha is an important, or community of practitioners is a very important and valuable asset, and can, in some sense, fill some of those familial roles. In some sense, the Buddhist teacher is, as a mentor, is fulfilling a sort of parental role. Even they say the father guru and that kind of thing in traditional Tibetan things. And in Indian culture, you talk about sort of more cosmic versions of mother and dad. So that is a challenge, though, that I think a lot of us are appreciating, and that you shared that, Sikandar. And, if anybody would like to respond directly to him, please do. Sort of our virtual Sangha. Daniel is saying, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Ramdas. Well, I guess if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with Ramdas, which is what I don't think I'm enlightened, but I'm going to go spend a week with Ramdas. So, yeah, that's a very interesting point. And even Buddha, who kind of abandoned his family, in all fairness, left his wife and child to go off and seek enlightenment. At the end, he had to reintegrate with them, and actually they became his students, as far as I understand it. So at some point, even if you do leave for a while, there is some notion of going back. And certainly my model, which was Trungpa Rinpoche, was a big family affair. All his relatives were included in a big way. So, and his son Sakyong Mipam holds the lineage of Shambhala, and we feel like, in a sense, that the community is a kind of clan. That's the Mukpo clan. We talk about that. So there's familial relationships there, and all kinds of relationships in life sort of mirror or model our family relationships too. So they can sort of become almost an expression of that kind of familial energy. And of course, family and familiar, you get the idea there? Those two things, those two words are obviously connected. So again, we have about 10 minutes left, which I'd like to spend. I just sort of finger painted on this one because I knew you guys would have a lot to say. But I'd like to hear from you now. If you could go to a second window in your browser, go to facebook.com if you're just, go to facebook.com/David Nichtern if you're just joining us, and lob in your comment or question. I see my old friend Justine is chiming in there. Hi, Justine. Good to see you. I sort of view my family like a blueprint or guide, working at cultivating those characteristics of both parents that are strengths and clearly seeing those habitual patterns to target and work on specifically. I also find that what irritates me about my parents are exactly those habits that I have myself. Well, of course, that's, boy, if we all took that point of view, we'd be making leaps and bounds. Um, that's a very important principle there. This leads me to working on patience. Yeah, no doubt about it. So that's another point, is that the family can be kind of claustrophobic because it's so close to the bone in terms of what the I think I've often had the experience of gathering my family and going, oh my God, this is sort of all so similar, and it can feel a little bit close. And then after you, like if you spend 2 or 3 days together, there's a kind of warmth and heat that comes out of it that's really fantastic, actually. And maybe a lot of us in the modern world are not experiencing that as much as we could. Okay, let's see what else has anybody chipped in. Okay, here's Priya. I come from a stereotypical Sicilian Italian dominated family, and there are many patterns, including holding secrets and grudges. I swear they will take these secrets and grudges to the grave and beyond. In an effort to not continue the patterns, I live a very open life. How do I bring these things to their attention to break the cycle without coming off as aloof? Yeah, that is, of course, I'm glad you're raising that point, Priya, because a lot of people, once they start doing some kind of practice, feel like they're having insights or making some kind of, developing some kind of clarity, and then they go back to their family or their intimate relationships we talked about last week, or friends, or work colleagues, and how do I bring that into those relationships without, kind of necessarily being arrogant about it and thinking, well, I have the upper hand now, and I've got to, educate these poor unenlightened people. So of course that will get that, and $2.50 will get you on the subway, in New York. So, that's a really good question, Priya. And I think the key is, modeling the behavior you want to see in others. That would be the thing I come back to over and over again, rather than trying to teach them. If you model that behavior, and if you want to see more openness and more gentleness and more communication, rather than looking at it as you're teaching them how to do that, you're just showing a way to be that maybe has kind of more space in it, and inviting rather than kind of lecturing. So a lot of that is is intangible stuff. It's not verbal, even if the secrets and so forth are in the verbal domain, the energy is not in the verbal domain. And everybody wants to be appreciated and loved. That's the common ground, and if you're generous of spirit in that way, there's a lot more space to share those kind of things. Having said that, it's very challenging. I think a lot of people would agree, and I personally would agree. I spent hours with my dad, who was a psychiatrist, trying to explain the notion of egolessness, which was to him, kind of an anathema. The ego is a big deal in psychiatry. And in Buddhism, you talk about non-ego, and he thought that's some kind of psychotic breakdown. But I think, when we went at it intellectually, we got nowhere. So, or it could be interesting, to have those kind of conversations. But the essence really would be how you treat somebody and what kind of consideration you show. And I think we have to be prepared to let people be who they are on some level, and love them the way they are. But this is a very good point you raised. Really, really beautiful that you brought that up. So Dharmatard is saying, Dad has a gap in his teeth, and moms are too close. Mine are straight. Dad is an earthy atheist, and Mom is a dedicated Catholic. I'm Buddhist. What sucks is that they are both hot-tempered, and socially awkward. Oh well. That's a good one. I don't think that really kind of needs a comment. I think it's complete as it is. So, Mary Sue, hi Mary Sue, good to see you, is my role in my family is changing as well as my mother passed in June. I have become the organizer communicator, a role my mother excelled in. Not quite comfortable in this role. I was not groomed for this by her. She had no successor, so to speak. But my father encourages me in this new role. Wow. Very cool. You know, so much of our being raised, we were formed by the expectations of the parents. So I've often said, that there are 3 stages in the maturation of an individual. And I even trace the Buddha's development in these 3 steps. And the first one is you're raised with the imprint of the family karma, a strong imprint of the family karma. Then in the second phase, you break out, which is Buddha leaving the castle, leaving the palace, and going to find out his own truth. And it seems to be a very, very important step, even though it's slightly rebellious and antisocial from a certain point of view. But if somebody doesn't do that, they've never really differentiated themselves as an individual. And then the third step is it's beyond rebellion. One has integrated, the family karma with one's own personal journey to the point where you can be comfortable again with the people in your family. I guess for some of us that meant, leaving the family, becoming a Buddhist. I would say probably at the time my parents did not understand at all what I was doing on a certain level, my family, and then really exploring that in depth, and then being kind of integrated enough to come back in and just be who you are in relation to your friends and your colleagues and things. So, like at this point in my life, everybody would sort of understand that's part of who I am, and that's ongoing conversation to explore it or not, or just let it be. So that's a really good point too. Very interesting point. So we have, time for a few more comments. Again, I'm inviting you, if you like, to continue the conversation with each other, if you like, by just reaching out directly to anybody whose comment has triggered something in you that's interesting. Like I see already, Priya has a couple of comments, one from Beth. Beth is saying, by your example, it would be like telling my Irish family about themselves. They may ask if they see you're happy. So that's sort of along the lines of modeling the behavior rather than lecturing on it. So let's try Monica here from DC. I have 2 teenage sons, and my first question is, any tips on how not to screw up the kids? Boy, I know a lot of parents who are super conscious about that, almost to the point of paralysis. Knowing what we know about family karma, are there any bits of wisdom you would offer your younger parent self? I'm still a parent right now. I've got a 35-year-old son, and I'm still a parent. So, if you could. Otherwise, been thinking about family karma a lot lately. Saw somewhere a good quote recently which said something like, the challenge is to embrace your identity, familial, cultural, without fixating on it or being defined by it. Trying to understand that idea where we come from is important. And yet we have a choice to not repeat the bad patterns and habits. Hoping so. Yeah, well, one of the most poignant things I think, and you're expressing it, Monica, and I've experienced it myself, is watching, when I see my son, at least to my perception, express some of the habitual patterns that I see in my father. And going, gee, I wonder how that happened, you know, since they only knew each other a certain amount of time. So obviously, and a lot of my friends who are trying to do like conscious parenting are almost obsessed with kind of not trying to pass along family kleshas along to the kids, to the point where it's become, like you could say, hyper intellectual exercise, or sort of very deliberate and um, you know very careful, super careful. So I think at a certain point we have to, my answer is we have to trust our basic goodness and realize that even with all those things, that fundamentally we're actually transmitting some kind of goodness about being ourselves and being alive, and trust ourselves and trust our intuition, and know that, there's a quote I'm going to read you all that I just finished mixing Krishna Das's new album, producing his new album, and working with Jay Messina, who's a recording engineer. And Jay said something. We were working on these mixes, and for those of you who know that process, it can get very, very tedious in terms of really trying to perfect. You can sort of control what everybody played, and you can move notes around so that they're right on the beat, and you can pitch correct things. And a lot of the music you hear is sort of the computer has really been used heavily to sort of perfect the music. And he said at a certain point, and I'm quoting Jay here, even if you make it perfect, it may still not be right. So at that point we let go, and in terms of our mix we said, enough, let's let it go, let's move on. So I think maybe it's a good note to end on. Even if you make it perfect, even if you get it perfect, you may still not make it right. And recognize that we are all human, and even as we do these kind of austere practices, sort of gearing towards enlightenment and perfection, that maybe one of the outcomes is that they just help us realize our humanity, and as we'd say in Shambhala, our basic goodness, our basic quality of goodness, and that is what we're transmitting. And if you can transmit that to somebody, that's a very powerful transmission to give your children. And you do it more by example probably than by words.